In this video, we are going to be taking a look at how to create a composition from scratch. We'll be using a web template and we'll be creating the flat format, the simplified flat format composition. So let's get started. So first, let's have a look at all the templates that we have in our clinical data repository. Now I already have a very simple template, this simple nurse vitals.v0 template. This only has the blood pressure and the pulse, and it only includes systolic and diastolic blood pressure and the rate of the pulse. So first what we are going to do is I'm going to copy the template ID and I'm going to put this in my environment variable as usual. It's already there. So I'm just going to go to the get web template JSON section and I'm going to go and get the web template. So now once you have this, you need to copy this and copy this to your clipboard. Now here is where we will actually start working with something more complicated. So I'm just going to create a new folder here and call it sample composition. So let's just go into that. So I'm going to open this in a text editor called VS Code. You don't really need to have it. It's just there because I like doing my work in VS Code. We are not really going to be writing any code, so don't worry about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder here and I'm going to call it templates, and I'm going to put another file here called simple nurse template.json. It doesn't really matter, you can just put anything you want. So here we have the entire response. What we want is only the web template. So I'm going to get rid of all of this and I'm going to get rid of this as well. So now once you have this, you can start understanding what it really means to, what a web template really means. And we'll again go through that. I'm just going to make this a little bigger for you. So now that we have this, I'm going to create another file called composition.json, and I'm going to put this side by side so that it's easy to reason about them. So now a composition is nothing more than an instance of a template. And in fact, if you look at the tree structure here inside a web template, you can make all of these different sections yourself. Now the example endpoint is a very easy way to get this and you can get it automatically. But this is a more tedious approach, but we'll be doing it anyway. So open the JSON structure and now we'll start one by one. The first thing that you need to know is that the paths append. So meaning in the tree, you look at the ID first, and then you look at the children, and you just have to append this ID one after the other. And the way it works in the simplified flat format is that you first look at this. Let's copy that. And you put a slash, and you come here to children and copy this ID. And that's it. You're already in the simple nurse vitals v0/category. So now here, if you see, in the RM type, it tells you how many times it can occur, minimum, maximum, and the RM type. Now this RM type is pretty important because that actually tells you what data type it's expecting here, the value of the data that this should be. Now this is coded text, and an excellent resource to actually reference all this is the official EHR-based documentation. So I'm just going to go to their read the docs section. So ehr-base.readthedocs.io and go to flat. So now once you go to flat, they give you a general description of exactly how all of these work. It's an excellent resource. Again, they tell you the same thing. All of these IDs append together and the final result will look something that I'm going to show you. But apart from that, they also give you a very good description of all the RM mappings. So RM mappings are basically data types for every single RM type in OpenEHR. So RM types are again the reference model types. So they have many types. So from things like compositions to things like coded text, they provide almost everything. Now, if we come here and have a look at the DV coded text here, they actually already give you a hint in this section saying that, okay, there is a suffix code and they have a list of things that are possible, that can be entered here. And here they actually tell you that it can only be 433 and which is corresponding to an event, and the terminology is OpenEHR. So in OpenEHR, there are a lot of these context elements that are usually always going to be the same. So in fact, if you go to the composition RM type here, they tell you all of these things. Category is one of them. If you see here, category is always going to be 433, and the value is going to be event, and the category is going to be terminology. We technically could have seen that in the RM type, which is DV coded text, and we could have opened this. So I'm just going to show you. So again, under the DV coded text, you see this is the minimum entry that you can enter in a coded text section, and this is the maximum entry that you can enter. Now we'll just be going with the minimum, so we just need the value, code, and the terminology. And as they already have mentioned here, the code, the value, and the terminology will be 433, event, and OpenEHR. So we'll just be using that. So again, category, just use the pipe sign, code, and that will be 433. And again, the exact same thing, but instead of code, we'll have value, which is the actual textual representation of this particular code. Unintuitively, that is called label in this case, but this is actually the value, and the value here goes into the code. And we also have a terminology, and we already see that in the web template. We also have a terminology here, and that will be OpenEHR. Okay, and that's it. If we get this, that's the first section of the composition. Now we just need to keep going. So there are other tools that you can use, like Medblocks UI VS Code extension, to make things simpler for you. But in this case, we'll not be using this. Again, here you see that it says that category is checked because it's already done, but we'll not be using this tool. Instead, we'll just be going with old-fashioned copy paste from this web template. Okay, so you see that the next part is context. Now you can technically make things easier for you by using the extension. So this context, you can copy the path by just right clicking and clicking on copy path, and you can get this extension easily by just Medblocks UI, and that will give you the Medblocks UI VS Code extension. And I will just show you how it looks like, the copied path. So that's it. It just looks like this. So that is exactly the same as you would get if you go through the web template yourself. So the ID followed by the ID here. So that's /ID. Now again, this is an event context, and you don't need to worry about the RM type if it has children. So you just keep going inside it, and keep a lookout on the minimum and maximum values, because this will change the path sometimes. So we'll look at that. But context is an event context, so we'll just go inside that, and then we have start time. So again, we'll have /start time, and this needs to have a value, and it tells that it's DV date time. So we'll look at that in the OpenEHR documentation. So just let's search for DV date time, and we have DV date time right here. So we'll see that it needs to look like a ISO format date. Okay, so I'm just going to copy this exact same date and put that right here. And up next we have setting. Now again, setting is something that is a context element, and you can even know which are context elements and which are not by this in context true value. So most of the time, these context elements, you are okay just copy pasting from EHR base's own documentation for the composition. So for example, if you see here, right, if you see under composition, let's just go on to next. Most of the time you will find that things like start time, setting are all here. And in this case, for setting, it's always going to be 238 other care. And the terminology is going to be OpenEHR. So we'll just copy paste that. So this is again under context. So you need to be sure that this is context / setting. And again, this is a DV coded text. So we know that it has three things: the code, which will be let's see here, the code will be 238, and let's copy this again, and let's call this value, and that will be other care, and finally the terminology. Now, most of the time you don't have to do this by hand. You will usually have some sort of a, you'll have a program that's doing this for you, but this is just so you understand how this all works. That's how you get the terminology. Fine. We've gotten the setting now. Let's go next. So now finally we come to the blood pressure. Now blood pressure is again not inside context. As you can see here that context is one element and that ends with this yellow bracket, and blood pressure starts off a new yellow bracket, meaning they're both in the same level. So we need to start from here, simple vitals / blood pressure. Okay, it's easy to confuse yourselves when you're working with these paths, so be careful, or use a tool like Medblocks UI VS Code extension when you're doing this. So again, we can see that the minimum is 0, the maximum is 1. So whenever the minimum is, whenever the maximum is 1, you don't have to worry about the path. You can just go the same way that we've been going. When the maximum is more than 1, you need to put the index. So I think that will come here. So for example, any event which is under blood pressure has a maximum of -1. That means that it can occur infinite number of times. So we'll see that again. So now blood pressure again it's an RM type observation, but we don't need to care about that. We just go directly into the children. Now that being said, like observation does have some attributes that you can provide. So you can go into the RM mapping here and you can figure out what all you can provide for observation, for example. So you do have other things that you can provide here, but in our case we are just making a simple example. So we'll again go into the next any event. So now under any event, we see that any event is again, we are in the blue brackets now. So any event, now here is where you need to be careful when the cardinality changes. When the maximum is more than 1, or if it's -1, which means infinity, you need to make sure you put the index. So :0. So you are telling it that this is actually an array. There are multiple items here, and this is the first element in the array. And then we will continue with the same approach. So after any event, you have systolic. So /systolic. Now here again, we are in the purple, brackets. Make sure you notice that. So systolic is again a dV quantity. So if you look at a dV quantity in the OpenEHR guide, so dV quantity, it's right here. So we can see that dV quantity, at least the minimum, we should provide it with a magnitude and a unit. So we'll do that. So I think that's just asking for the systolic blood pressure. So magnitude will be 120. It's a normal blood pressure, and the unit, so it also depends on the template what units are available. So and the magnitude will also be validated usually. So let's take a look at the template here. So for example, under systolic, the inputs, we see validation here. So the magnitude, it's telling that it should be precision 0, 0, meaning you can't put in any point values here. And the range should be 0 to 1000. And you see that this is a number, it's not a string. So I'm actually wrong in putting this as a string. This should actually be a number. Same here, it should be a number and it's not a string. And the unit again, so let's come back to the unit, and here you see that the only unit available is mmHg. So just put that as it is, mmHg. Okay, so and we have diastolic, and again you can enter this value, so you can put this value if you want to. So dV quantity, again it's very similar, and we have minimum maximum of 1. So you just continue with any event and put diastolic, but in this case I'm just gonna record the systolic blood pressure. I'm just gonna skip this. That's the thing when the cardinality is 0. You can skip it if you want to. So I'm just gonna skip that entirely. And then we have time. Okay, so now you need to be very careful where this is. So this is again in the purple brackets, meaning it's in the same hierarchy as diastolic, right? So which means just like systolic and diastolic, we need to put the time within the event. Okay, so let's copy this from here. So after any event, okay, I think there are 2 quotes here. After any event, we put in time. Okay, so now this is again daytime, dV daytime, and these are all context elements, and they are asking for repeated data because the time is an attribute of the composition as well as the observation that's inside it. So the observation inside it can be in a different time than the composition. So in this case, we'll just copy the exact same time and paste it here. And that's it. We've kind of completed our blood pressure. Up next, we have subject. Now again, blue brackets. So we'll just see under which level it is. So blue brackets is the same level as the main event. So in this case, what it is, you need to first understand subject. So subject is party proxy. So this technically represents who this composition is for, the person who's making the composition. And in this case, it automatically gets populated as the EHR to whom you're posting. So although it says min 1 and max 1, usually you don't need to worry about the party proxy, especially when it's subject. You can skip this completely and you'll be okay. So we are going to skip this. And then we have language. Okay. Now again, it's part of the blood pressure archetype, right? This is again part of the blood pressure archetype. We are still in the blood pressure archetype. The way you can see that is that the bracket again, this child bracket, it's again in purple. So we'll have a look at that. So this is opening right here, meaning that it is inside blood pressure. So we'll copy it till blood pressure. Sorry, that copied the time. So we'll copy it till blood pressure slash, and then we'll go to, I think we'll just, this is again a good thing. If you're using VS Code, you can just make it smaller, right? So this is again any event. So we are out of the event right now. So we'll just make this smaller. We don't care about the subject. And then we are at language. So right now we are inside blood pressure and language. So language, and we'll come to this. I'll tell you what this looks like. But for now, we'll just finish this whole thing off and just put the encoding as well. So blood pressure slash encoding. Okay. So now we don't really know what to represent here, although it tells you that it's a code phrase. We'll actually go back to the EHR base website, and this time you can see what a code phrase is, and it tells you that it needs to have a code and terminology, whereas a coded text you also need to have a value, but this is just a code and terminology. And again, the example here is exactly about language, but you can also find this if you see the composition, because these are all elements of the composition and the observation itself. So again, you can also find this in an observation. So if you go here, so here, for example, you see that language, for example, EN, terminology, this, and you also have encoding here, right here, encoding UTF-8, and it's telling this is the terminology. So in this case, we are just going to copy this exactly as it is, the encoding. So encoding, that is that encoding terminology. Now we need to copy this again, and we need to get a code. So let's copy this. Yeah. Code, it again depends on the language in which, UTF-8 is usually the right thing here, unless you're just going to be using characters, in which case ANSI, you could say it's ANSI, but UTF-8 will be good. So language, again, language, here they tell you that EN and it's ISO, that's the terminology. So we'll just copy that as it is and paste it right after language. So language terminology, and we also need to provide a language code. So the code will be EN. So I'm just going to move this one step up. So language and code, we've gotten this. So you could have also found this if you had gone under observation. So you see here, the observation also tells you that these are all context elements and you don't really have to worry about this. You can just copy this exactly as it is, like language, encoding, and again, DV text. This is just some random text. So that's it. I think with that, we've almost completed the blood pressure section of this. So we are just going to minimize blood pressure itself right now. So I'll just minimize blood pressure. Now we've come to pulse. Okay. So again, we know that pulse is under the main template. So just to verify, we will make the context smaller. We'll make the category smaller. So we know that this is a simple nursing template. The ID is simple nurse vitals, and we directly go to pulse heartbeat. Okay. So we have that. So we'll just copy that exactly as it is from the previous one. And now, that copied everything. So let's just get rid of this. So we have this ID, and then we have the pulse heartbeat. Just put that in. Okay, and this is again an observation. So it'll have very, very similar attributes to the previous one, and the any event also has very similar attributes. So under The pulse heartbeat, again, you know that since we've started the any event, that needs to go in. And since it's a maximum of -1, we need to also index it here. And once we index it, we come to the rate. Okay, so /rate. And rate is a dV quantity. So we know that it has magnitude, and the magnitude, let's say 85. And we also want to tell what unit that's in. So there is some issue here. I forgot a comma. So 85, and let's copy this entire thing and tell it the unit. That'll probably be per minute unit. So let's check all the available units, and we see that the validation is 0 to 1000. All that is fine. The unit is just per minute. Okay, so just give /minute. Okay, and time. So again, let's see exactly where time is. It's in the same hierarchy as under any event. So under any event, you need a time attribute. So we'll go under this any event 0 and /time. We'll copy paste the exact same time that we had here. Okay, that should do it. Now that's it. We've kind of finished that, and now we have subject. So again, don't worry about subject. Whenever it's party proxy, you know that the EHR base instance is automatically going to populate that. So don't worry about that. Language, very similar to the last one. So this, again, we are in the same hierarchy as pulse heartbeat. Okay, we are not inside any event anymore. Any event is done. So we are inside the pulse heartbeat hierarchy. So under pulse heartbeat, we'll copy pulse heartbeat again till pulse heartbeat, and we will put language. Okay, and language and encoding, it's going to be exactly similar to what we did previously. So I'm just going to copy this and replace the paths a little. So it's going to look something like this, but instead of blood pressure, we are going to replace that with pulse heartbeat. Okay, so I'm just going to do a macro here real quick. So instead of instead of blood pressure, I'm going to replace all of that with our heartbeat. So language has come twice. So let's remove that, and we are good to go. So we have language, we have encoding, exactly similar. Now composer. Now composer is one party proxy that you cannot ignore, especially when dealing with EHR base. There are other clinical data repositories which automatically populate this as well, but in the composer field, you at least need to pass in the name in this case. So again, EHR base tells you this. If you look at the composition RM type, it tells you that you need to have a composer and needs to at least have a name. So the composer is the person who is actually creating this record. So it will be the doctor who's making this. So again, not to confuse ourselves, let's minimize this and let's look at where the composer is coming from. So composer is right below simple nurse vitals. So we'll create simple nurse vitals /composer. And we know for a fact that you can just go with the name and it'll be okay. Name Siddharth Ramesh. Okay. And composer is now done. Now next, again, we have language and territory. So let's just do that one last time real quick. So again, we can look at this here, language and territory. So I'm just going to copy this exactly. And I'm just going to replace the template ID here. In this case, it's going to be our own template ID. Now you have the language as English, that's fine. The territory code is US. I'm just going to change that to IN, and that's it. Now I'm just going to close this web template on this side, and we're just going to explore our composition that we made over this hugely tedious process. But this is our result. We do have our composition, and the moment of truth now, we are just going to check if this works. And there are obviously mistakes that you can make when you are manually handcrafting it. And that's why it's a good practice to actually post it and check. And we'll see if there are any errors. I'm not sure if there will be, but there might be errors here and we'll find out. So create flat composition, make sure you have an EHR ID that's created. The template ID should be this exact template ID. Format will be flat. Let's replace that with our own template that we handcrafted, and let's post that. And it got created. So That's it. Now you have created your own composition by hand from scratch. I know this was a very tedious video even for me to make, but I really want you to understand how you can go through a web template and look at which RM type needs to look like what yourselves. And I am pretty sure the EHR based website helps drastically in you understanding what each format should look like. So hope you like that. Thank you. Thank you for watching. This video was part of the OpenEHR course that's available on the Medblocks e-learning platform. I believe that the best way to learn a topic is to actually do it yourself and learn by doing it. So we have a lot of tasks for you in the course that we'll help you do along with more video content just like this. And if you're interested in that, please do check it down in the link below. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.